Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories as per usual. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 1,000 likes on this one. Dropping a like only takes a quick second and it helps out the channel immensely. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated. I post content just like this as often as I can. We are also about 100 subscribers away from 135,000. If you want to help me get there, I would really deeply appreciate it. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax. Enjoy the 2 hours of horror stories with no mid-roll ads. Except for the ad break after this intro, there will not be any more after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. I don't know what compelled me to confess here of all places. Maybe all the years in the pews caught up to me. Took in the good word. Or maybe it is the lingering prognosis that has me crawling my way back to Jesus. I don't know. Either way, I am ready to talk. From what I read, this is the type of group to listen. Father Lincoln says that sins are like roots. You don't fully get them up unless you dig out the hole, right down to where it all started. He wears clothes to forgive. The internet throws words to condemn. To be frank, I could use a little of both. So let's dig it all out. Back to the first day of many mistakes. Oh, and lock the freezer after showtime. Come again? I said, finishing the last swirl of my signature. That's the last part of the gig. Russborough coughed out as he inhaled the last bit of his cronut, showering the table and both us in buttery flakes. Studio closes just before sunset. You get here 15 minutes earlier, do your tasks, and lock the freezer no later than 7 p.m. Why does the studio own a freezer? He leaned back and swallowed. A deep breath wheezed in and out of him, indecisive on whether it was for annoyance or contemplation. He had heard that question before, many times. His dense monobrow suggested he was considering whether he would have to hear it again. Do you want this job? The chill from the previous night's air still lingered in my bones. I was out of gas and had only 2 blankets to my name. The rat cloth I had gotten from St. Mary's wasn't holding up as we ran into October, and I didn't know how many more nights in the Acura I could handle. Yes, sir, I do. It won't work out if you are curious. Believe me, some doors better left shut. I sat with that. Nothing about it sounded good. I'd heard the stories about these Hollywood types. Was it a vat of baby oil? A baby plantation to harvest fresh stem cells? The more my mind wandered, the more I wondered if I could handle whatever it was. If it were horror beyond my stomach, what would I do? Then my eyes landed on the contract again, and the length of the zeros made me unsure. Lock it after 7. Got it. No later than 7, kid. That's important. Alright, got it. Russborough didn't seem pleased with that, but he reached into his bottom desk drawer and pulled out my gear. An Outer Lights security hat, a metal clipboard case with a laminated paper taped to the front that had the word checklist bolded at the top in faded red letters, and a Glock 19. Whoa, I get issued a gun for this job? You got a problem with that? No, I just didn't expect it. Do studios typically have armed security? His eyes sat half open, unamused. He reached over to the black security hat, analyzed it, then matted it down on my head. Do now. He smiled. His extra cheek fat curled around the corners of his lips, creating an echo of a double smile that he was silently laughing at me. Listen, the talent we have here requires a bit of extra protection. I ain't no yuppie. If someone tries to get where they ain't supposed to be, you use that, you hear? I nodded. Anyway, he brushed away some hair infringing on his Rolex. Shift starts in about an hour. Why don't you watch from the screening room? Is that okay? Of course. Welcome to the Outer Lights family. I left Rusborough's office and made my way to the screening area, the Glock heavy at my side. Always such a light thing in the hand, but heavy on my hip and in my guts. I'd never gotten used to it. I fired plenty in my life, a lot less since leaving Beaumont PD that spring, but still, authority. The power to do what needed to be done. Such big things. You think you know what you'd do, how you'd act in a situation where you needed to pull that trigger, to be someone's hero. Then you get to the moment and just about crap yourself. The screening room was dead save for 3 individuals. The first was a man in his late 40s. The studio lights blinded me from the reflection off his head. Wafts of cigarette smoke enraptured him as he sat, watching the talent perform from his director's chair. To his immediate left at the foot of the stage was someone in an all-black suit. Sunglasses indoors. Total G-man. He was the only one who turned to me the moment I opened the door. He saw my hat and gave me a faint nod of acknowledgement. I didn't return it, but it was the man on stage who stole my attention. Atop the stage, centered by 6 lights of soft white, blood red, and sapphire blue was the star. He was young, no more than 23, dusty blonde hair, striking green eyes, and a grin that said he knew more than you did. Draped over his shoulders was a scarred blue suit coat, painted with grime and old blood. He was shirtless underneath and had a gun in his hand. He looked down at it in his lap, switching his expression in an instant. I was never a movie type, but I could see his thoughts. He went from a generalized sorrow to now thoughts of impending oblivion. If she were actually here, we would have Marjorie enter stage left, the director said. I could now see the name Stillwell on the back of the chair. Can we get an intern or something to read her lines to Thomas? The man in the suit nodded at him and looked behind the curtain on the stage. At his glance, a frail 19 of something jogged out. Her brow drenched in sweat, a script in hand. Everyone stopped, waiting for each other to continue, until the director scoffed. "It's your line, sweetie." "Oh, sorry," she mumbled, flipping to the page in a frantic rush. She cleared her mousy throat and continued the scene in a jilted performance. "Isaac, just put the gun down. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it." "They're gone, Alyssa." "What do you mean they're gone, Isaac? What happened? Where is everyone?" Thomas, now fully his character Isaac, looked to her, his brow pinched into a grimace, lip quivering, eyes misty. "Alyssa? Isaac, where are the others?" "What about me? I'm right here having to live with it." His eyes fell back on the gun. "Isaac, where are they?" "How can you ask me that?" he said, looking to her now. "Don't you dare look at me like that. You don't get to judge me. You didn't make those choices. You didn't feel the hunger we felt." Stillwell spoke, reading the stage direction, and the actors followed suit. As Isaac starts to cry, Alyssa hugs him, embracing the truth of what he did in those mountains, what they chose to do, to survive. She buries herself in his shoulder, apologizing for everything, but Isaac looks on to the mountain, looking on to what was left behind. Was it his friends or all of himself? Thomas then looked to the seats, right at me. His eyes gripped me like 1,000 pleading hands begging me to stare. Goose flesh broke out all over my body as he spoke. "The jungle stole their lives, but I stole their souls, with every bite." "Cut." Thomas snapped up, ignoring the intern. "You don't think that line at the end is too much?" Stillwell raised an eyebrow. "It wraps the story up well." "Yeah, but what about just, I stole their souls? I mean, the audience already knows I nibbled on my friends up there." Stillwell looked at his watch. It was 6 p.m. He looked back at Thomas, and they had a silent conversation about that. "It's a good point, Tom. I'll consider it on the rewrite. We'll pick up tomorrow when Marjorie is here, and not coked out in a Denny's crapper, or wherever she is. Let's clear out so security can close up shop." They did. Not a single word or glance at me. I watched the room clear, and in a few minutes, it was just me. The majority of the checklist I had to do were basic items. Cut the power to the stage, conduct walkthroughs at 3-hour intervals, ensure building access points are secure by 6:30. All standard stuff I'd done before in some fashion. I knocked them out swiftly and was left with the last 3 items, the first of which gave me pause. "Let in the groupie," I read. I followed the instructions, making my way to a service entrance deep in the heart of the studio. I opened the door, mostly to get a view of what to expect, when I heard a short scream as someone scattered to the ground. I looked down to see a young girl on her knees, looking up at me with a wounded expression. She was a frail thing, pencil skirt, low-cut top, curly brown hair, a dense amount of foundation, and clashing red lipstick. "Sorry," I said, helping her up. "I didn't see you there." "It's okay," she said, though I could tell it wasn't. Still, she made an effort to put me at ease, and I appreciate that. I gave her a once-over, and saw she now sported a small splotch of crimson on her left knee. "Let's get you a bandage for that. It looks like a good scrape." "No, that's okay. I'll clean it up in the bathroom." I insisted. While cleaning her up, I found out her name was Regina. She was 20, or so she told me, and that she was so thankful to be here. However, when the hydrogen peroxide hit her skin, her positive energy crumbled, and she stomped her good leg as if I was amputating the other. "So, you know the actor, Thomas?" I asked, hoping to distract her. It worked. She lit up like Figueroa Corridor. "No, but I really want to. We met at a coffee shop while I was practicing my lines. I'm an actress." "Uh-huh," I said as I finished wrapping her bandage. "He was so sweet. Said he really liked my stuff, and asked if I could swing by after he finished rehearsal." I was sure Thomas did like some of her stuff, but I didn't have the heart to tell her. The girl was too young for me to be crushing her dreams. I looked over at the checklist as she prattled on for another minute or two. Next item was up. Take groupie to talent manager. "Well, let's get you backstage." As we turned around into the hallway, I all but crashed into Suit. All my years there, and I never learned his name. He stood there like a brick wall in both size and demeanor. 6:43, he grunted. "Sorry?" He tapped his watch. "You're late. She was supposed to be with me at 6:35. "Yeah, sorry, she fell on the way in, and I wanted to get her patched up first." He looked at her, snatched off his glasses, and dropped to his knees, analyzing her wound. Regina shifted back and forth as he glared at her leg, but she did well otherwise to hide her discomfort. Then, Suit clicked his tongue in disapproval. "Not good." "What? It's just a scrape." "Yeah, I'm fine." He stood up, looked at me, and shrugged. "We'll see, I guess. You are the one who's going to hear about it." I didn't know what that meant, but he didn't give me any more time to contemplate it. "Follow me, ma'am." She did, like a giddy dog. I watched them walk off, some sinking feeling in my gut, but I wasn't sure from what. Was it for her, or was it because of Suit's words? As I reflected on that, Regina looked back at me before she went around the corner, waved, and smiled. Then she was gone. One item left. No earlier than 6:55, but absolutely no later than 7. Lock the freezer. I opened up the clipboard case, and inside was one of the most archaic locks I had ever seen. A massive steel padlock with a thick 2-inch iron key. I glanced at my watch, and the time read 6:54. Crap. My jog broke into a sweat-soaked sprint as I dove further into the studio, the lights in the corridor getting further and further apart. In my panic, I hadn't realized I was following Suit and Regina's steps. I thought they must have taken a different route, but as I followed the studio map more, I knew that wasn't the case. This was a one-way path. 3 minutes to the deadline. I made it to a staircase that descended into the earth. A pitch-black void into nothing, illuminated only by a single slit at the bottom, where the freezer door was barely ajar. I crept down. Sweat broke out on my neck. When I made it halfway, careful to avoid each creak and groan of the floorboards, I heard voices coming from inside. What is this? What happened to her knee? This voice was new, deep, no, thunderous. It rolled up the stairs like the boulder trap from Indiana Jones. When it reached me, my brain struggled to process it into language. She fell. That one was clearly Sue. She fell? That's what the security guard said. And what am I supposed to do with that? You know she won't heal. I understand, sir. No, you don't. Chains rattled. Something large was lifted and thrown, crashing into the wall below. The metal walls belted as the hard mass bent and warped the steel. Worry plunged into my heart as they described Regina. My hand snapped to my gun as I descended, quickening my pace. Calm down, Suit shouted. It's a scrape. She's exactly what you wanted otherwise. She was perfect. The voice rumbled in an almost melancholy way. It swelled in my stomach like the bass of some ballad. She still is. Do you know how hard it is to find someone with the exact auroras you wanted? She even has an inverted navel. Find another then. This one is ruined. No. What did you say? The voice seethed. Just please. Can you at least try it on? It was then that I made it to the door. My eyes instantly searched through the crack. The freezer was filled with bodies. They weren't hung on hooks like food, but in neat, vacuum-sealed rows of industrial hangers, like a macabre closet. Just beyond the door was Suit, his back to me. Beyond him, Thomas stood in front of an unconscious Regina. Then his head snapped up, his jaw separated from his skull with a brutal crunch. A 2-foot gray hand sprouted from Thomas's throat and used his forehead as leverage to pull the rest of it out. Another hand came out, then another. When the body that was Thomas crumbled to the ground like a skin suit without any bones, a writhing mass of floating hands branching out of some undulating distortion in space floated before Regina. At 6:59, the hands pried open her mouth and crawled in, inch by inch, cracking and breaking bone as it tunneled inside of her. My hand was glued to my gun. I knew I should run in, save her. That was my job, right? To protect and serve. At least it was, and once again I was here. All the power, all the authority, and all I could do was nothing. I knew that poor kid didn't deserve this, and as that conflict roiled within me, Suit turned around to face me. He wore an expression of pure indifference. No hate, surprise, or worry. He shook his head. A warning, but was it for me? Not against. As the horror before me unfolded, I was right back to where I was 2 years ago, watching those masked men enter O'Leary's, guns in hand while I idled outside in my cruiser. Just like then, I froze at the door handle, my body torn down the middle by the fence I had planted my butt on. My body, my mind, screaming in refusal as I compelled it to go. I wanted so bad to be strong enough, to do my job, the right thing. The seconds of the clock evaporated towards 7 p.m. I heard Rusborough's words from out the interview. As those people threw Mr. O'Leary onto the ground, beating him for petty cash, and as the bones of Regina crunched and crushed under the weight of Thomas's hands, I made the same choice that I did then. I locked the door. I didn't think much of the house when I first moved in. A friend of mine told me he was renting out a house. Cheap, quiet, perfect for me. He casually mentioned that a woman had lived there before, but she's not there anymore. I didn't ask any questions. All that mattered was getting the keys and finally having my own place. On the day I moved in, he handed me the keys and simply said, "If anything comes up, text me." Then he left. From the outside, the house looked completely normal. If anything, it was just a bit too quiet. No cars, no people, nothing going on. I actually liked that. Inside, everything was clean. Almost too clean. There were no pictures, no personal belongings. Nothing that made it feel like someone had actually lived there. Just furniture and empty space. As I went upstairs, a door at the end of the hallway immediately caught my attention. It was closed and the frame looked slightly warped, like it had been forced at some point. I tried the handle, but it didn't move at all. Probably just stuck, I muttered to myself before leaving it alone. Later, while checking out the attic, I found the first real sign that something felt off. The room was dusty and cluttered, completely different from the rest of the house. Old women's clothes were scattered across the floor. Sweaters, jackets, shoes. Like someone had left in a hurry and never came back. In one of the jacket pockets, I found an ID. It belonged to the previous tenant. I stared at it for a moment longer than I should have. Something about it didn't sit right with me. Still, I took a picture and texted my friend. "There are still some things from the previous tenant here. Is someone going to pick them up?" He replied almost immediately. "Yeah, someone will come tomorrow." That was enough for me. I put everything back and went downstairs to finish setting up. I built my PC, played a few games, and put some music on in the background. Outside, it started raining. At first it was just a light drizzle, but it quickly turned into a heavy downpour, the sound of it echoing against the windows. Everything felt completely normal, until the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, a woman was standing there. She seemed friendly, but there was something off about her. "I live next door," she said, holding out a cake. "I just wanted to introduce myself." Her eyes kept shifting like she was constantly checking her surroundings. "Would it be okay if I came in for a moment, just until the rain calms down?" I didn't think much of it and let her inside. She sat down on the couch and we made some small talk. Nothing unusual, but the silence between our sentences felt strange. Like something was missing, or like she was waiting for something. After a short while, she stood up again, gave a quick, polite smile and said, "I should go." And just like that, she left. I shrugged it off and went back to my PC. At some point, though, I started hearing something outside. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming from the yard. I took off my headphones and listened more carefully. There it was again. Footsteps. I walked over to the window, but there was nothing there. I even stepped outside for a moment, but the rain soaked me within seconds, and the yard was completely empty. Just my imagination. I muttered as I went back inside. Still, something didn't feel right anymore. The house felt different. Too quiet. Too aware. Eventually, I went to bed. I don't know how long I had been asleep, but the sound of the doorbell suddenly jolted me awake. I grabbed my phone. 2:45 a.m. My heart immediately started racing. I got up, went downstairs, and opened the door. She was standing there again. The neighbor, completely soaked, her hair stuck to her face, breathing heavily. "There's someone outside," she said. "He's walking around the houses. I saw him." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "Can I come in? I don't want to be alone." I hesitated for a second, but I didn't want to be alone either. So I let her in. "Sit in the living room," I told her. "I'll check upstairs, see if I can find something." I didn't even know what I was looking for. As I walked upstairs, I texted my friend. "There's someone outside watching the houses." He replied almost instantly. "I'll send someone over. A friend works with the police. He'll be there soon." I added, "I let the neighbor in, so I'm not alone." I slipped my phone back into my pocket and went downstairs again. The living room was empty. She was gone. My heart skipped a beat. Hello? No response. I grab my phone again. A new message. Which neighbor? I felt a cold chill run through me. I typed back. The one next door. A few seconds passed before he replied. No one has lived next door for years. I own that house too. Everything inside me dropped. I ran upstairs without thinking. My eyes immediately locked onto the door at the end of the hallway, the one that had been stuck before. It was open now, just a dark gap, and somehow I knew. She was in there. Without thinking, I rushed into my room, yanked open the closet, crawled inside, and quietly pulled the door shut behind me. My hands were shaking. My breathing was way too loud. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Followed by a soft dragging sound across the floor. She was inside the house. The rain kept pouring outside, its sound echoing through the walls as she moved through the rooms, searching, checking, getting closer. You're here, somewhere. Her voice was quiet, way too close. I held my breath. My phone vibrated in my hand. I barely dared to look. A message from my friend. You need to get out now. That woman is the previous tenant. She's mentally unstable. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like she had to hear it. All I could feel was fear. Cold, paralyzing fear. I'm sitting here now, in the dark. The closet is the only thing between me and her. I can hear her outside. Her footsteps. Her whispering. And now, I can hear her coming up the stairs again. If she opens this door, it's over. I just have to hope the police get here before she finds me. We had started out the evening with a bottle of expensive Merlot I ordered off the wine menu. Monica always loved it when I took charge this way, and saved her the trouble of having to browse the selections herself. Besides, after 6 months of dating, I was confident I had her preferences down to a T. When the bottle arrived, I pointed out the label to her. Did you know Merlot is French for blackbird? I asked as our server poured us 2 glasses. We were at our usual table, rooftop seating, with an expansive view of the city. I did not know that. Monica acknowledged. I could always tell she was grateful when I taught her something new. I was glad when she didn't ask about the rest of the label. Probably could have figured it out if I tried, though. I've always been good at picking up on context clues. You know, speaking of birds, I read something interesting the other day. I mentioned as I swirled my glass. They just published a study that found birds in the city are more afraid of women than men. You'd think it'd be the other way around. Who even pays for those studies? Monica wondered. She surprised me by breaking off a piece of bread. Monica never ate bread, but it was only to crumble it up and sprinkle it near her chair. Seems you have no trouble endearing yourself. I smirked as I watched a sparrow hop over to cautiously peck at the crumbs she had scattered for it. Guess I'm dating a real-life Disney princess. Maybe if one lands on me you can say that. She played along with a laugh. Or if I spontaneously break into song. I'd kind of like to hear that. She scrunched her nose in a way I found adorable. Take me out to karaoke next time. Next time. If I had my way, there would be plenty of next times. I was going to marry this girl sitting across from me watching that little bird hop around her heels. She was funny, smart, beautiful, and judging by her intense focus, fascinated by the wonders of the natural world. She observed that bird like couples at neighboring tables observe the glowing screens of their devices. It didn't hurt that she didn't break the bank every time I took her out, and insisted on treating her. She barely ate as far as I could tell. Yep, I was definitely a lucky guy. Hey, I'm gonna go use the restroom real quick. I set my napkin aside, still smiling, and rose. Monica looked up from the bird to beam at me. God, she was gorgeous. Really, I wanted to flag down our waiter without arousing her suspicions, and see if there was anything special I could do for her tonight. Maybe I could lie and tell them it was her birthday so they made a big fanfare about it. Pretty sure she would love that, and the servers always looked like they enjoyed themselves in those moments. Sometimes I'd see them called to different tables 5 or 6 times in the course of a single evening. I'd never worked in the service industry, but it seemed like a fun job. I never located our server. On my way back from the bathroom, I paused at the entry to the deck, surprised as I spotted Monica still sitting alone at our table. She had something in her hand, but that something wasn't her phone. I realized it was the bird she had been feeding earlier. She held its tiny body clasped in one hand, and was gently massaging the fragile dome of its head with one fingertip. Its beady little eyes were squinted half-closed in... was that contentment? Or fear? An uneasy feeling stole over me, but I shook it off. No, it looked like it was being lulled to sleep by her caressing. I wondered how she'd got a hold of it. Clearly it trusted her enough to be held. My girlfriend, the Disney princess, communing with nature. I stood back and observed a moment with an indulgent smile on my face. I probably looked like a cornball. Not something I've ever been accustomed of being, but I couldn't resist. I watched as Monica brought the bird nearer to her lips. I thought she was going to plant a kiss on it before letting it go. An idea I was less enthusiastic about. Thoughts of avian germs, lice, parasites flew from my mind the next moment. I could see the bird visibly struggling now in Monica's fist, her skin bleaching white with the ferocity of her grip. She opened her mouth and it was so much more than a kiss. Her lips parted wide, wider, until I thought her jaw would dislocate, and then it seemed to unhinge and continue opening wide, ropes of saliva trailing between her upper and lower teeth, the crown of her head practically sinking back into the nape of her neck. The bird gave one last fearful struggle in her hand, but it was too late, as its head disappeared inside my girlfriend's mouth. She didn't finish it in one bite, even though she could have, easily. Her teeth, so much longer than I knew, chomped down, wrenching the bird's head from its spine, like Saturn devouring his sun. A Goya painting I once described to her in great detail on our first date in a way that impressed her enough to agree to a second. I had guessed from the outset that Monica preferred a man of culture, but I was starting to wonder what I knew about Monica's preferences, actually. Her mouth opened a second time, like the act of eating was mindless, automatic. Her tongue the conveyor delivering the rest of the bird, still flapping. How was it still flapping? Down the yawning chasm of her throat. Her jaws snapped shut, her lips pressed tight together, and I watched the wiggling lump slide under her skin and disappear beneath the pressed Peter Pan collar of her dress. I thought about bolting. I had never dined and dashed in my life, but wasn't Monica the only one who had dined at this point? My vision was tunneling, and still I stood rooted to the spot. Fight or flight? Hadn't the bird tried both and lost, giving way to freeze? Monica glanced up then and spotted me, and there was no escaping back into the restaurant undetected. I walked slowly over to our table and sat down. Our server reappeared within moments to take our order. Just the house salad with dressing on the side for me, Monica said, folding her menu shut. I stared at something caught in her teeth. She noticed and closed her lips abruptly, feeling around, her tongue bulging out a pouch in her lower lip before sweeping sideways to her cheek. She fiddled this way for a while, then plucked the detritus free and laid it out neatly beside her plate. You know what they say about girls who can tie cherry stems into knots with their tongues? She said slyly. They don't say they're Disney princesses. Uh-huh. She hadn't been drinking any Shirley Temples I was aware of, and the gnarled trophy she had produced for me definitely wasn't a cherry stem. When our entrees arrived, I watched her sip wine and move leaves around her plate as she carried on convivially. At least, she was giving the impression of eating. I hadn't even touched my chicken parmesan. I was too busy shooting furtive glances at all the other female diners, single, paired, gathered in groups, and noticing the identical house salads plated before them with dressing on the side. I could have sworn several of them were looking at me. The sun had just sunk below the horizon, and either the lengthening shadows or their evaluating gazes made my skin grow cold. There were no more birds hopping around underfoot. Maybe they had all flown away. What? I asked when I realized Monica was awaiting a response. I was just thinking, when we move in together, we should set up a bird feeder, she repeated. Or even a birdhouse or bath. We can make it really welcoming for all the urban birds in the neighborhood. That way, they'll know I'm not something they need to be afraid of. Uh-huh. She smiled again, then dabbed her mouth with the corner of her napkin. She seemed to be having some indigestion. I rose without meaning to. I think I need to use the... I was suddenly surrounded by a crowd of people. I sat back down, sweating bullets, hemmed in on all sides. Someone slid a slice of cake in front of me, right next to my untouched meal, and a fleet of servers started clapping and singing in unison. A pair of hands garroted me with an elastic band as a conical hat was affixed atop my head. When you were in the bathroom earlier, I told them it was your birthday. Monica crowed. My father loved a good paper trail. He always stressed the necessity of having proper documentation for every purchase, every agreement, every discussion that ended with something fundamentally different than when it begun. He believed in the importance of paperwork and the uselessness of a good handshake. The only legally binding thing a hand can do is put ink to paper, he'd always say. And to believe the gesture of touching palm to palm holds any sort of weight is to open yourself to the evils of human dishonesty. It is for this reason that, upon his recent death, my sister and I were left with the long, arduous task of sorting through the library of paperwork that the man left behind. When I call the collection a library, I do so without an ounce of hyperbole. His vast hoard of papers easily filled an entire large room's worth of drawers, files, and shelves. We knew we'd have to handle his last will and testament when he passed, and knowing our old man, we figured it would be a headache to get through, but at the time we thought this one document would be the worst of it. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. Upon diving into his extensive collection of records, we were both genuinely surprised by how many old documents the man had hung on to over the years, even long after their usefulness had dried up. Bank membership forms from the 1970s for banks long since defunct, half-century-old grocery store receipts, handwritten in blotchy, messy ink, parking tickets paid lifetimes ago for cars he hadn't owned in decades. It was all there, filed away neatly in the darkness of his old office, waiting for the day that we'd have the displeasure of drawing it all back out into the light. Knowing that most of it was worthless, we were tempted to simply shred it all and throw it away. But the persistent nagging that something of importance might be hidden in that massive trove of paperwork was strong enough that it convinced us to sort through it all manually. In a way, it was actually a much more enriching experience than I would have thought. We got to see our father's signature evolved throughout his life, and going through those decades worth of documents gave us the sense that we were reliving that life from start to finish. But at the same time, it was an agonizing chore that I dreaded doing each day. Because yes, it took us days to sort through all of that old paperwork, most of which was a complete waste of time. I suppose I couldn't really be upset about having to complete this final task for our old man. He provided us with a good life growing up, and the minor burden of sorting out his paper affairs after his death was a small price to pay compared to the work he had put in to ensure that we never wanted for anything, and had always lived in the lap of comfort and luxury. I also can't blame him for his overly cautious desire to keep a paper trail of his entire life. He came of age in an industrial town during a time when industry was on its way out. Jobs spawned through handshakes and goodwill suddenly vanished when the mines dried up and the mill's furnaces went forever cold. Nobody got any form of a severance package back then. One day you had a job, the next you didn't. One day you were able to put food on the table, and the next you weren't. It was a harsh, unforgiving time in our region's history, one that we haven't fully yet recovered from, even more than half a century later, and it set the stage for what my father's life would eventually become. Times were tough for our father and mother after he'd lost his job at the old mill. They managed to keep afloat for a while thanks to our mom's waitressing, as well as the various odd jobs that our dad worked. But it soon became clear to everyone in town back then that their livelihoods were dependent on an industry that had gone to an early grave. And without that industry, their economy wasn't going to last. Our parents needed a backup plan if they were going to have any hope of getting by. Thankfully, our old man had one. Our dad loved to paint from a very young age. In fact, the second largest collection that he left behind, after his collection of paperwork, was his vast accumulation of personal paintings that he kept in his private gallery. For his own purposes, he used to say. Before the decline, painting had only ever been a hobby for him, a way to decompress and pass the time between grueling shifts at the mill. He never thought he could have made a living off his work until the desperate times came, and he found himself backed into a corner with no other means of making ends meet. And so, with his prospects running as dry as the mines and his optimism going as cold as the mills, he turned to that old passion in hopes that it would offer him a means of escaping from the ever-deepening hole that he found himself trapped in. Setting to work like a man possessed, he drew inspiration for his paintings from the urban decay and gothic, almost sinister landscapes of the region in which he had grown up. His work brought him little success in the backwater town that he called home, where people could barely put food on the table, let alone afford to blow their hard-earned wages on frivolous pieces of art, depicting scenes that they could look at for free with a simple glance out their windows. Knowing that he had no hope of making a living from his art in his current environment, and with the area's decline only growing worse by the day, my mom and dad decided to take on the ultimate gamble. They packed up their things worth keeping, sold the rest, and departed from the only place that either of them had ever called home. Their time spent away was, until the unfolding of recent events, largely a mystery to me. I knew they spent some time on the West Coast where my father continued to work on his stalled art career, but any details of his successes and failures there were never shared with my sister or me by our parents. All either of us knew is that by the time they returned home more than a decade later, their fortune had been secured. I wish I had known the circumstances that had led to their fortune sooner. I wish I had asked them questions while they were both still alive to answer. While I doubt they would have told me the whole truth, I might have been able to glean something about what had happened while they were away. The work of going through my dad's old records started as a tedious slog, and only got worse as the task went on. We brought a shredder into his office and began meticulously going through each document, ensuring that it was irrelevant before condemning it to its fate. Leafing through those old files and deciphering the messy, aging words scrawled therein would have been annoying, bothersome work for people half our age. And with us now into our 50s, with our worsening eyes and less nimble hands, the task was an even greater test of patience. We did our best to stay positive during this time, to talk about our memories of Dad, and to a much lesser extent, of Mom, and to keep the atmosphere as light and easy as we could. But this became more difficult as time went on. and we became disheartened by just how little progress we made against the seemingly insurmountable horde of records that we needed to sort through. The first noteworthy record, and thus the first one worth keeping, was found by my sister toward the end of the second day. I had just gotten back from taking a box of 3 decades worth of fast food receipts to the garage trash can. I hadn't bothered to shred them when I heard her speak from across the room. "Oh, wow." I placed the now empty box on a nearby shelf and turned to look at her. "What's up? Find something interesting?" "I'd say so," my sister said. "Come take a look." I approached her. As I drew near, I saw that she was at the beginning of a fresh box of records, possibly even on the very first item inside. When I came up alongside her, she looked at me with an excited smile that she hadn't even considered wearing since the start of our task the previous day. She handed me the slip of paper in her hand without speaking, and I looked down at what was written upon it. It was a bill of sale for one of my father's paintings, one titled Gothic Decay. The bill was dated May of 1958, about 3 months after he and my mother had moved out west. "His first sale," my sister said. I should have known he'd have kept the receipt for it. I read the bill over again and frowned slightly. Not the most lucrative sale in the world, was it? "Well, no," she said, "but it was a start." She looked back into the box that she had pulled the bill from. "It looks like these are all sale receipts for his paintings from back then. Maybe even every single one that he had sold." "Knowing Dad, it probably is every single one of them," I said. My sister pulled the next one from the list. It was dated September of 1958, roughly 4 months later, and indicated that the painting had sold for a similarly pitiful price. The third sold in December, again for what I'm sure was barely even enough to cover the cost of his art supplies. "Not a lot of money coming in that first year, huh?" I said. The pattern continued for 2 more instances before ending in April of the next year. In almost a year's time, our dad had only managed to sell 5 paintings, and each for far lower than he probably would have liked. I might have felt bad for him, had I not known of the wealth he would eventually amass. By flipping through the receipts, we learned that he didn't sell another painting for most of that year, until November of 1959. I imagine during that long gap he'd been forced to jump back into doing odd jobs in order to make ends meet. That likely led to a perpetual cycle of grueling work, during which he probably had little time to paint, and even less time to market his work. It's a miracle his aspirations didn't die there, and if I didn't know any better, I would have assumed they had. My sister looked at the receipt from November of '59 and whistled sharply. "Hot dang, look at this one." I did as she instructed, then joined in her surprise whistle. "That's quite a jump." "I guess this is when he finally made it, huh?" To say he had made it with this sale was an understatement. This piece, titled Rust Town Blues, sold for more than double what all his previous paintings had sold for combined. And things didn't stop there. In fact, they only seemed to speed up. He sold 2 more paintings that November, each for a higher price than the last. In December, he sold 8 more. In 1960, our old man was selling upwards of 10 paintings a month, and the number only grew from there. Over the course of the next decade, he sold dozens and dozens of paintings each year, each for staggering amounts of money. I didn't know how he ever had enough time to complete so many paintings, and I wondered if his seemingly obsessive commitment to his work is what sowed the seeds for what my mom eventually did. Exactly 10 years later, to this very day in November of 1969, he sold his last painting of the bunch. It would be the last one he ever sold in his life. "And that's all she wrote," my sister said. "This must be when he and Mom came back home," I said. A shame he didn't paint anymore after that. "Well, a few years after they came home is when he and Mom had us," she said. "Must have been tough to keep up his work while raising a family." "Yeah, well, Mom didn't exactly make it any easier for him, did she?" I said. My sister shook her head. No, that she didn't. I paused for a contemplative moment before speaking again. You ever feel like we took his dream from him? My sister shook her head. He had plenty of time to pursue that dream. He and Mom had us pretty late, especially for the time, and they knew that if they wanted to raise a family, they really needed to get on it. They made the choice to come back here and have us. We didn't force it on them. I shrugged, still itching with a sudden sense of guilt that I couldn't quite shake. Yeah, I guess you're right. Just like how nobody forced Mom to change her mind. Yeah, she said. That too. We let the conversation drop and returned to our work. The painting sales were the first items in the entire collection to be spared from the shredder. Deciding it was good karma to finish on that high note, we wrapped up our efforts for the day and both of us went home. I spent a long time that night thinking about those dozens and dozens of paintings that my father had sold back then, wishing that I could see even one of them. I had shrunk so far into my own head that my wife actually noticed my aloofness and asked if I was all right. I reassured her that I was, even if the answer didn't feel entirely honest. She eventually drifted off to bed, and I decided to decompress for another hour or so before following her there. I opened my laptop and looked up a few of the names of my dad's old paintings that I remembered from the receipts, to see if copies of them had ever been posted online. No dice for any of them. His works must have only really traveled in small, private circles, which had evidently kept them just as private for all these years. I suppose the money earned from them was tangible enough, but I found myself wishing that I had more to remember my old man by than just a bunch of rotting old documents collecting dust in his house. My sister and I started back up again the next morning. We spent most of the day locked back into the banality that we had grown accustomed to in the previous 2 days. My sister threw out a box of expired grocery store coupons. We once again didn't even bother shredding those. Well, I saw to the destruction of a drawer full of long expired vehicle registrations from several different states. She shredded dozens upon dozens of old bank statements. I found and rescued our parents' marriage license, which I considered destroying for a brief moment before deciding that it was just barely worth keeping around, if only in remembrance of a happier time when the four of us all still lived under the same roof. Besides, our father had never actually officially filed for a divorce. He'd never been able to find our mother in order to make such a thing official, so I figured keeping the marriage license around could almost trick us into believing that those good times never actually came to an end. Inconsequential acts of shredding and saving went on for some time until I discovered a file stuffed with years upon years of census data, something I almost tossed without a second thought. Had I actually done so instead of taking a few minutes to leaf through those papers, I may have never discovered the knowledge that I am now forever burdened with. Upon deciphering the messy handwriting, I managed to find my parents' names in the 1958 census listed at some West Coast address that I had understandably never heard of before. A quick online search told me that it was a small one-bedroom apartment that, based on its pictures, looked like it hadn't been renovated since well before our parents had lived there. The 1959 data showed similar information. It wasn't until I reached the 1960 sheet that I raised my eyebrows in surprise. The hell is this? My sister, who was in the middle of eating a peanut butter sandwich, turned to look at me. What is it? I flipped back and forth between the 3 sheets, thoroughly confused. This census data, it doesn't make sense. My sister returned her sandwich to its plastic bag, placed the combo onto a nearby box of records, and walked toward me. What do you mean? What can be so crazy about census data? Take a look, I said, handing her the 3 pages. These first 2 just show Mom and Dad as living in an apartment together. Nothing strange there, but look at the sheet for 1960. My sister did as instructed, then frowned as realization hit her. Who is this 3rd person listed here? I don't know, I said. It's kind of hard to read the handwriting on that thing, and parts of it aren't even filled out. But it looks like she has our last name. Did a relative of Dad's come to stay with them for a while or something? I guess that's possible, she said. Then after a pause, their address is also different on this third one. I looked up the address on the 1960 paper and found that the house there, built in the early 1950s, was a huge upgrade to the apartment that my parents had been living in before. This made sense. By early 1960, our dad had started seeing good returns on his painting sales, and they likely could have afforded at least a mortgage on the house by the time the census was collected. But this didn't explain who that third person could have been. My sister took the census file and combed through more of the sheets. This woman, whoever she is, stayed with Mom and Dad for several years, even moving to another house with them. That's weird, I said. How have we not heard of her before? Maybe they had a falling out with her after this and didn't like to talk about her. I guess that's possible, I said, once again not feeling confident in this explanation. She looks to have moved out when they moved back here, my sister said. She's on the 69 census, but not on the 70 sheet. She must have stayed out west. Do you think she's still alive? My sister asked. I don't know, I admitted. If she is, I wouldn't even know how to get in touch. Makes me wish we still had phone books, she said. I doubt we'd find a woman her age anywhere else. A quick online search proved my sister right. We were unable to find anything conclusive about the mysterious woman who shared our last name. It was as if she didn't even exist outside of that census data, and even then, the information we could glean about her from that paperwork was limited. Her age was left blank on every census form that she appeared on, so we couldn't even guess what her relation was to our dad. With the trail going cold, we dropped the conversation about our mystery relative and moved on with our task. My sister returned the container holding the census data to me, and I continued to comb through it. It contained data for every year of our dad's life from the age of 18 until this past year, when he passed away. I watched as they returned back from out west, after which their number went from 2 back up to 3 the year after I was born. From there, we expanded to 4 when my sister came into the picture. We remained as 4 for several good years after this. Then, abruptly, the number reduced back to 3. Seeing that sudden reduction felt like a punch to the gut. It took the wind out of my sails and killed my desire to review the remaining years. Following a brief skim of the remaining data, I placed the container aside and, after a short period of consideration, decided not to shred them. I determined that, at the very least, the information present in that thick stack of paper was interesting enough to hold on to. Our day continued on as normal. We were making real progress, and by the end of the day, we could see that the end of our cleanup was in sight. We thought about staying late that night and getting ourselves that much closer to the finish line, but seeing as we both had families to return home to, we decided to call the night at a reasonable hour. I spent a long time thinking about the mystery woman that night. My wife, seeing that I was once again distracted, asked me what was wrong, and I told her about what we'd experienced that day. She reiterated the points that my sister and I had discussed about the woman likely being a relative that our parents had had a falling out with, and suggested that I not worry about who she was too much. This proved difficult to do, but with some effort I managed to set the woman aside long enough that I was able to get some sleep that night. We got started early on the third day, eager to get through the rest of the paperwork with haste so that we could potentially finish the task by that afternoon. Most of the morning passed in a blur of shredded documents, many of which I couldn't identify now if I tried. Scraps of ruined paper filled the several surrounding garbage bags and tarnished the floor in bunches of long, thin streamers. We worked quickly and quietly, with little time spent on conversation. I was certain that we both spent that entire time thinking of the strange woman who shared our last name. Though we hadn't met this woman, nor had we ever even seen her face or learned of her exact connection to our family. There was something about her that made me feel as if I had known her for my entire life. It was a strange sensation that I just couldn't shake, and it made me even more eager to learn more about her. Was she a woman that I had met in my youth and had forgotten about until that census data dredged up the memory of her from the murkiest trenches of my mind? At the time, I was certain I would never know. Anybody who could have told me the truth was already dead. What I didn't realize at the time was that I would be learning her true identity very, very soon. This knowledge would change everything I understood to be true about my family, and even as I write this, I wonder if I would have been better off never knowing it. It was still fairly early into our day when I discovered the file containing the copies of our birth certificates. We might have found it strange that our father had made those copies, had we not known who we were dealing with, but it didn't surprise us at all to find them there amongst his collection. What was surprising, however, was that where we had expected to find only 4 birth certificates, we actually found 5. Leafing through the stack, I passed first my sister's, followed by my own, then our mom's, and finally our dad's. I figured this would be the end of the file, and seeing as these were all unofficial copies and were not necessary to keep, I thought I would soon be sacrificing them to the shredder god that had been so gluttonous these last few days. But what I saw there behind my dad's certificate halted my every movement and made me completely forget about the destructive deity that I had been so ready to honor. I don't remember speaking, but I must have, because my sister asked me what was wrong. Knocked free of my sudden surprise, I looked at her with a confused look on my face and struggled to even find my words. I weakly held out the 5th birth certificate for her to take. My sister approached and took the paper from my lame grip, then grabbed onto it with both hands and looked it over. A frown that must have resembled my own from a few moments ago crept across her face. She briefly flipped it over and looked at the back, as if its rear would somehow reveal it to be some sort of post-mortem prank played on us by our old man. When she saw that it wasn't, she flipped it back over again and reviewed it another time. What the hell is this? I leaned over and once again examined the certificate. Much to my chagrin, its details remained the same as they had been from my initial viewing. Written there, in unmistakable black ink, was the now familiar name of the woman, of the girl, who had shared our last name. "It's the person from the census," I said, voicing what we both already knew. "The one who lived with Mom and Dad." "Yeah," my sister said, "except her birth year is listed as 1959, the year before the 1960 census. That means instead of being one of Dad's cousins or aunts, she had to be his daughter," I finished for her. "Their daughter, and our sister." This fresh revelation stifled us with a stunned silence that clung to us quite some time. My younger sister, so shocked by what she had read, needed to sit down in a nearby chair. I opted to lean against the sturdy desk behind me. "What's going on here?" my younger sibling finally asked. "What's happening?" "I don't know," I told her. These 3 words were the only ones that I could muster. She shot me an almost accusatory look. "You don't know about this?" "Of course I didn't," I said. "Mom and Dad never told me anything about them having another kid." My sister considered this for a few moments, then seemingly accepted it. What could have happened to her? And why would they keep that from us? I shrugged. "Your guess is as good as mine." "Did she suddenly die out west or something?" My sister asked. "Is that why they came back here? To distance themselves from the pain of that experience?" I looked down at the file again. "There isn't a death certificate here. Don't you think if our sister had died that Dad would have included it in his file? It could be stored somewhere else." she said. Or maybe he just didn't want to remind himself of it. Maybe he just wanted to forget whatever happened to her. But then why would he keep her birth certificate in here? I realized that, unlike the others, this one was the genuine article instead of being a copy. And besides, knowing Dad, he would want that death certificate filed, regardless of how painful it was for him to do. Maybe she went missing, my younger sister suggested. Maybe she was abducted or something, and they never declared deceased, just like they did with Mom. But Mom didn't go missing, I said. She left. Still, same idea. Maybe since they never declared her deceased, he never had a death certificate to file. Maybe. I didn't remember seeing any old articles about a missing child when looking up our older sister's name, but it's possible I either missed them or didn't recognize them as pertaining to the same person that I was researching. You'd think they would have at least told us about her, though. I'm not going to pretend to know what went through their heads at any given time, especially not through hers. I didn't respond for several lengthy seconds. Yeah, I eventually said. Yeah, I guess you're right. We didn't speak for a while after that. We didn't quite know what to say. The two of us returned to our work, but it was clear that neither of us was particularly enthusiastic about the task ahead. And so, after another half an hour or so of clearing out our father's documents, we decided to call it a day early and return the next day to hopefully finish up. I didn't tell my wife about what we had learned that day. I would eventually, but I needed time to process it for myself before I felt like I'd be able to vocalize our discovery to anybody else without being interrupted by a crippling panic attack or a deadly deluge of tears. I'm sure she realized that something was off about me again, but unlike the previous times, she didn't ask me about it. I think she could tell it was a demon better left undisturbed, until the time came that I was ready to poke it with a big, sharp stick. I lay in bed for hours that night, emotionally exhausted from what I had learned that day, but paradoxically unable to sleep. I thought about my older sister, who she had been, where she was now, if she was anywhere at all, why she had been kept a secret from my extant sister, and me for more than half a century. Such a train of thought proved to be a strong sleep repellent, but eventually slumber's inevitable persuasion managed to convince my mind to slip into the realm of darkness. When I slept, I dreamed of her, even though I had never seen her face. I knew the person in front of me was my older sister. She started out as a baby, the age she was when she was in those census papers, but she began to age rapidly, passing through dozens of stages of her life in a matter of seconds. She eventually morphed into the adult woman that she may or may not have ever become. I asked her what had happened to her, why she had been lost to us for so long. She couldn't answer. All she could do was frown at me, and then start to cry. Spirits were low the next morning. My younger sister and I felt crippled by the seemingly unconquerable task that was sorting through the relatively few remaining documents in our father's collection. But with a pair of heavy hearts and a lack of enthusiasm, we set to work on completing the job before us. I don't remember when or where my sister found the contract. I suppose these details don't matter. What matters is that its discovery changed everything, and that it unleashed something into our lives that we would never be able to put back into the metaphorical tube. God, how I wish we could. It was buried beneath a pile of other contracts of significantly lesser importance. My little sister might have even looked past it and thrown it away, had she not been careful, though I doubt she could have missed the bizarre, Stygian signature planted beneath our father's at the contract's end. She spent a while reading it before she showed it to me. It wasn't very long, so she must have reviewed it at least a dozen times while I sorted through other things, oblivious to her prolonged silence that had been so normal that day. The document didn't read quite like any contract I'd ever seen before, and certainly not like any of the contracts that were in our father's collection. It was handwritten on a sheet of yellow, ancient-looking parchment, penned in a way that looked like it had been scrawled in haste, but at the same time with an elegant penmanship that looked practiced, as if its writer had ample experience drafting such documents. I refused to copy down the words of the contract verbatim, but will do my best to paraphrase. The contract stated that for a period of 10 years, our father's paintings would bring him fame, wealth, and success. He would create important and beloved works of art with both haste and ease, which would effortlessly sell as soon as they went up for auction. At the expiration of those 10 years, the wealth he'd earned would remain, but his fame and status would be forever lost to the greater world, remembered only by himself and by anybody who believed him when he told of his forgotten past. Also on that day, exactly 10 years from the signing of the contract, and on each subsequent 10th anniversary, the writer of the contract would return to collect something from our father of the writer's choosing, which our father could not refuse. This would continue until the death of either party involved in the contract. The document was signed twice, first by our father in that same handwriting that we had seen countless times and grown intimately familiar with in the last few days. His signature was followed by a nightmarish scratching of lines and shapes that I cannot in good faith call a word, at least not present in any known language. Just looking at this malicious shape made me profoundly uncomfortable, and conjured within my mind countless pillars of evil, imaginable only to the most tormented of souls, and many that are mercifully beyond any existent soul to ever know. Both signatures, if that is what you want to consider this second blasphemy of writing, were penned in a splotchy, reddish-brown solution that I could not identify, but which I doubted and still highly doubt was any sort of ink. Our father's name was written in neat print next to his signature, so that it was easily legible. The other signer's name, however, was not awarded the same privilege. Beneath both signatures, though, was written a date, one that fell in early November of 1959. My sister and I sat in incomprehensible silence for what felt like hours, passing the contract back and forth whenever one of us had mustered the courage to read it over again. The heavy, unspeakable weight of the document resting between us seemed to distort the very fabric of reality with its density. When we finally spoke of it, both of us acted as if we didn't understand what this contract could have meant. But I'm sure that we both knew right away what its implications were. Our father, still struggling to make a living even after he and our mother had moved out west, entered into an agreement with someone, or something, that promised him the success he so desperately dreamt of and craved. And so he acquired a decade of wealth, fame, and success, in exchange for a lifetime tormented by whatever entity he had taken up this contract with. He would then go on to die in obscurity, the extent of his success remembered by nobody else, except for the thing that continued to collect from him decade after decade, taking more and more from the man that it was so determined to torment and eventually destroy. Sure were the terms that our father had entered into, and such were the terms in which the contract had bound him, until the time came that death finally set him free. I'm sure it's not a mystery what this entity collected from him after that first decade had passed. Subsequent decades, though, are a little more unclear, but I have a strong idea of at least two of those collections, which occurred while I still lived in our family home. One of those I'm sure you can deduce. The other I choose to keep to myself. Thinking back with a freshly open mind to those early years of my life, I can recall a pair of times that I am now certain each occurred on a year ending in 9, that I was awoken by a suffocating sense of overwhelming, primal darkness that swept over our family home in the blackest, coldest hours of the night. At the time, I assumed these occurrences to be the product of my own personal nightmares, quickly forgotten and seemingly unrelated to the tragedies that immediately followed them the next day. One of these occurrences came when I was just a boy. Another, when I was on the cusp of becoming a man. The former came at a time in my life when I did not fully understand the tragedy of loss. The latter was how I became truly acquainted with it. More visitations and subsequent collections must have occurred after I'd moved out on my own, but since I was not present for them, their energies must not have reached me. I'm sure if I try, though, I can conjure more family tragedies that occurred in the final years of decades past. But at the time of writing this, I am not entirely interested in reliving old pains just so I can recontextualize them with a present knowledge, nor do I wish to discuss such things with my living sister, much like how I got the sense she'd rather not broach such subjects with me. I write this only a handful of weeks after having found my father's contract. My sister and I didn't finish our project that day, and we still haven't been back to sort through the rest of our old man's records. I'm not sure when we will, if we ever do. We left that contract locked in the sturdy drawer of a metal filing cabinet in our father's empty home until the day comes that we ever feel the need to reassess it. In the meantime, I've spent these few weeks in a complicated state of mourning for those I've lost, and those I've never truly known. My father seeming to fall into both categories quite nicely. I've also spent a lot of time wondering. I wonder about what lies ahead for my sister and me at the end of this decade, now that our father is no longer alive to fulfill his end of the contract. When I last read the terms of the document, it explicitly stated that the contract expired with my father, but I would not be surprised to find those terms mysteriously amended should I pull that cursed record from its metal coffin and review what was written upon it. I get the strong, nauseating sense that the words next of kin might appear somewhere in there now, indicating that our family is not yet free from the curse that my father, blinded by a desperation that I hesitate to call greed, forever shackled to us. At the time of writing this, my sister and I now have less than 4 years, a time so agonizingly long while also so alarmingly brief, until we know if we are truly free from the contract that has been furtively looming over us for our entire lives. I doubt if either of us will allow a single day to pass where we don't think of the document that we left locked away in our dad's home, where it will fester and rot until the day comes for its terms to flex their power once more. I'm sure we will both think at length, as I already have, about what will come for us on that cold autumn day in November of 2029, about the dark, primordial presence that is no longer bound by its contract with our father, and which may very well now possess free rein to attack us directly with its deadly claws of overwhelming malice. But I suppose we'll just have to wait and see what comes. I shouldn't have been driving that night. The snowstorm had gotten so bad that I could barely see past my windshield, but I kept telling myself I was close to home. Just a few more kilometers. That's all I needed. The roads were empty. No headlights, no houses, just endless snow and the sound of the wind hitting my car hard enough to shake it. Then my tires lost grip. Everything happened too fast. The car spun. The headlights flashed across the trees, and then I slammed straight into a ditch on the side of the road. For a few seconds, I just sat there in silence, trying to process what had happened. My airbags had gone off, my nose was bleeding, the engine was dead. I grabbed my phone, no signal, of course. Outside, the storm kept getting worse. Snow was already piling against the doors of the car. Staying there meant freezing to death, so I got out. The cold hit me instantly. My shoes sank into the snow with every step as I started walking down the road, hoping to find literally anything. After what felt like forever, I finally saw a light in the distance. A house. Old, isolated, 2 stories tall with warm yellow lights glowing through the windows. I almost cried from relief. I knocked on the door so hard my hands hurt. A few seconds later, an old woman opened it. She looked to be in her late 60s, maybe older, gray hair tied back neatly, soft smile, warm eyes. "Oh my God," she said immediately. "Come inside before you freeze." The heat inside the house felt unreal. She sat me down near the fireplace, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and made me tea while apologizing over and over for the storm, like she somehow controlled it. Something about her was strange, though. Not creepy at first, just too friendly, too caring, like she was overly happy that someone had showed up at her house. "You can stay the night," she told me. "My son's old room is still upstairs." I thanked her at least 10 times before going upstairs. Honestly, I was exhausted enough that I probably would have slept anywhere. The room looked untouched. A perfectly made bed, shelves full of old books, clothes hanging neatly inside the closet. It didn't feel like a guest room. It felt like someone still lived there. I sat down on the bed and noticed a folded piece of paper sticking halfway out from beneath a dresser. At first, I ignored it. Then curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it out. It was an old psychiatric evaluation report. The name matched the woman downstairs. I remember my stomach tightening as I read parts of it. Paranoia, violent episodes, psychotic delusions involving her son. One sentence stood out more than the others. Patient refuses to accept that her son died several years ago. I stared at the paper for a long time. The wind outside howled against the windows. Suddenly, the entire house didn't feel warm anymore. I looked around the room again. The clothes, the books, the perfectly made bed. She hadn't preserved this room out of grief. She genuinely believed her son was still alive. I wanted to leave right then, but outside was a blizzard. My car was wrecked somewhere down the road and I had no signal, so I convinced myself I was overreacting. I locked the bedroom door and tried to sleep. I must have drifted off eventually because the next thing I remember was waking up to a deafening crash downstairs. It sounded like furniture being thrown over. I checked my phone. 3:07 a.m. At first I thought maybe the old woman had fallen. I slowly opened the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. The house was dark now except for the faint orange glow coming from downstairs. Then I heard a man's voice, calm, talking softly. I froze. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else in the house. I moved closer to the staircase and looked down into the living room, and that's when I saw her. The old woman was lying on the floor at the bottom of the stairs. Dead. Her neck bent at an angle that made my stomach twist. Blood had spread across the wooden floor beneath her head, and standing over her was a man, tall, thin, covered in snow. He was talking to her body like she was still alive. "You shouldn't have let him stay here," he whispered. "You know what happens now." I nearly made a sound right there. Instead, I backed away from the stairs as quietly as I could and locked myself inside a small storage closet down the hallway. I covered my mouth with both hands, trying not to breathe too loudly while I listened to him moving around downstairs. Floorboards creaked, cabinets opened, then silence. Complete silence. I grabbed my phone again. Still no signal. My heart sank. Then for 1 second, one tiny second, a single bar appeared. I immediately called the police. The dispatcher answered almost instantly. I whispered everything as quietly as I could. The crash, the dead woman, the man downstairs, the isolated house in the middle of nowhere. The dispatcher suddenly went quiet after I gave him the address. Way too quiet. Then he asked, "Are you inside the Miller house?" Something about the way he said it made my blood run cold. "Yes," I whispered. Another long silence. Then he said something I still can't stop thinking about. "Listen to me carefully. Hide. Do not leave your hiding spot, and do not ask any more questions." I remember whispering, "What do you mean?" But he ignored me. "I'm sending someone now. Stay quiet." Then he hung up. That's when I heard footsteps downstairs again. Slow, heavy, coming toward the staircase. The closet I was hiding in suddenly didn't feel safe anymore, because I realized something horrifying. To call the police, I'd had to leave the closet and go into the old woman's bedroom upstairs where the signal was stronger. If he had seen the light from my phone under the door, then he already knew exactly where I was. And now I can hear him walking through the hallway outside. We're here in the studio, sitting in the small but sleek rented office for Parafindings LLC. It's a two-person company that my boss set up to run the YouTube channel, podcast, and other creations coming out of the Parafindings brand. Most of the ideas and creative work come from Kyle. He's the genius behind it all. I'm only on board because of my AV experience and fast video editing. That's what I'm trying to do now, sorta. I have about 8 hours of audio and video to make sense of. Luckily, all the action happens in the first 90 minutes. The rest is mostly candlelights flickering. I click back to the beginning and think of what started this all. A digital suggestion box entry telling us to go look for the Daylight Witch, along with an address to a home in Tigard, Oregon. Google Maps said it was 20 minutes from our office. Google Street View said it was a dilapidated 2-story home. Kyle decided it was a go. I pressed the play on the video. This was just supposed to be the B-roll and test footage, but it ended up being all we got. The first timestamp is from 10:04 p.m. last night when Kyle and I met up at the Daylight Witch house, captured by the clip camera mounted to my hat. The recording opens with us passing our flashlights over the boarded up front door and grated windows. My POV then shows me looking back to see if any neighbors would notice us snooping. But the house was far enough down its own driveway at the end of a tree-lined street. Privacy wouldn't be an issue. We pulled on the window grates to no avail and didn't even bother with the front door, which had so much wood nailed to it that it was basically a wall. "Let's see if our write-in was legit," Kyle said as he walked around back. He was referring to a line in the original email that mentioned we could get in from the back. He, or she, would turn out to be right. The back door had its own grated window that was reflecting some of the bright white moonlight. It didn't open easily as the wood had swelled into the frame around it, but with enough force, Kyle was able to fling it open. We entered and got to work. The plan would be for Kyle to spend 12 hours in this house beginning tomorrow night, 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. As Kyle understood it, the hook of the story would be that the fear starts after the darkness. At least that was his best guess given the name, Daylight Witch. So, to best prepare, we wanted to mount a couple of cameras now. In the morning, we'd review how the footage captured the sunrise hitting the back of the house, eventually illuminating the inside. If we needed to adjust for lighting, we'd do so before tomorrow night. "Looks like there's a nice view from this fireplace if you want to set one up here," Kyle said. I would ultimately suggest a slightly different position for the camera that still captures most of the living room and dining area, both in the front of the house, and a view into the kitchen, positioned in the back where we just came from. We then debated setting up a camera upstairs as well, but there were 3 different bedrooms, a bathroom, and a narrow hallway connecting it all. This meant there was no obvious spot for a camera. If Kyle wanted to film up there, he would have to use the hat cam. I set up the other camera at the other end of the front room, above the dining table, capturing a different angle of the front of the house with its own line of sight into the kitchen. An interesting thing about these placements that I didn't notice at the time, because they're both at an angle, neither view shows the back door into the kitchen that we use to enter the house. My video editor now shows 3 different feeds, soon to be just the 2 mounted views as Kyle asks me to toss him the hat cam. I'm gonna film some stuff at home, like packing food and a sleeping bag and stuff. That's where the hat cam feed ends. In both mounted camera views, I see myself taking it off and throwing it to him. "You ready?" Kyle asks. I tell him that he can go ahead, that I want to do a couple more test shots to see how well it handles different levels of light in the space. I ask him how the streams are looking on his phone, which he can pick up when in range. "Pretty crisp. Nice work. You don't have your phone to check." I didn't. I had left it in the car, parked just 15 feet from the other side of the boarded up front door. "Well, don't stay too late," Kyle says before turning around into the kitchen. Because of the camera angles, he disappears from frame before he actually would disappear from the house. From here, without my POV view, my memory takes over. I pick up my flashlight and turn it on. I pass the flashlight from floor to ceiling and end to end. Tomorrow I'll look to see how the video quality changes from the flashlight moving in and out of view. Next, I light some candles that we brought and place them on a few surfaces, praying that none of these candles tip over while we're gone. Finally, I look around the room for a light switch and quickly spot one by the front door. I flip the 2 switches on and off and nothing happens. Not surprising in a house like this. Who exactly would still be paying the electricity here? But if there's a chance these lights work, I'm gonna want to see how they affect the video. I try the light switch by the dining room table, possibly also affecting the stairwell light, but the house remained dim. Just to check every box, I walk into the kitchen and turn on the light, and it worked. Bright, blinding light floods my view, followed by my own high-pitched scream. In front of me, up against the back door, is a tall, gaunt man, now bathed in the yellow light of the kitchen overheads. His rotting face was its own shade of whitish yellow framed by long gray hair that looked singed off in places. His eyeballs were stark white, no irises and only the tiniest black pupils, like lentils on a dinner plate. His lips were chapped to the point of blistering, with flaked skin threatening to pull away from his mouth. Out of instinct, I flick the kitchen light off, and just like that, the man is gone from view. I stand paralyzed in fear for what feels like 10 minutes. I've never been so scared and so sure I need to be anywhere but where I am in this very moment. I duck back into the front room and scan until I see my car keys on a tiny end table next to the fireplace. As I grab them, I hear a familiar click come from behind me. The radiating glow tells me instantly what I need to know. The kitchen light is back on. I call out hello to no response, which feels just as bad as if there was a response. Rather than re-enter the kitchen, I move to the closest window and look for a latch to open it, but it's been painted shut. As I trace the painted edges looking for a seam, I look beyond the glass of the window and onto the grating that's bolted onto the exterior wall. Painted seams or not, I wasn't getting out this way. The front door I don't even bother with, remembering how boarded up it was from the outside. With my back to the kitchen, I shimmy to the other end of the front room and up the stairs. However, despite being an entire floor off the ground, each window on the second story was just as reinforced as the first. The back door, I say to myself, it's the only way. I creep back downstairs and see the light spilling into the front room. I pep myself up with a few deep breaths, hoping that nothing is there when I pass into the brightly lit kitchen. But something is there. He is still there. Only this time he has one hand up in a crooked, flat-handed wave. His lips have opened into a smile showing fractured yellowed teeth. He's so frozen in this pose that the only movement comes from the slight rustling of the long black sheaths that cover his body. I turn the light off again, but this time I stay put, staring at the empty dark void that replaced the haunting pale man. I take a step towards the back door, and in an instant, the light pops back on. This time his chapped lips are closed, but tilted upward in a smirk, as his pale fingers hold up a pair of car keys. My car keys. I feel around for them in my pocket, but come up empty. I back up into the front room and crouch into the darkness by the fireplace. In the midst of my own terror, I ask myself if a man can be a witch, but soon realize it doesn't matter. Witch, warlock, ghost, zombie, demon. These words are the best we can come up with to define things we aren't even sure exist. Whoever is in that kitchen exists outside of any human label I could ascribe to him. I take a deep breath and think. He wants the light. That's when he shows up. A plan crystallizes as I notice a set of fireplace tools to my right. I grab the stoker and back up to the wall next to the opening that connects to the kitchen. One last deep breath. I rush around the corner, squinting my eyes to hide the horrible figure that remains by the door. A few steps into the center of the kitchen, I swing the stoker up in the air until I hear the sounds of glass shattering, blessing the room with darkness. I'm alone again. I can feel it. It worked. Or did it? Until I hear the click of my flashlight. I turn and see the daylight witch holding my lit flashlight pointing upward, illuminating his face like a camp counselor telling a scary story around a campfire. His tiny pupils look even smaller but stare into me with even more intensity. Like before, he's unmoving. Seeing his wide eyes stare without the relief of a blink makes my own eyes water, matched only by the discomfort of my lips as I see him streaked with tiny strips of blood that fill the cracks of his lips. If I'm not getting out of here through a door or window, my only way out is through. I charge towards the back door, unsure if I will phase through him like a ghost or crash into a physical body. But just a couple feet from the door, something in me changes, and all goes quiet. Somewhere in between a dream and a memory, the story unfurls. It's patchy and fluid, drifting from one scene to the next. A girl, lying on dry earth with a leg bent in the wrong direction. Her skin is sunburnt and blistered, infected with hours of unadulterated sunlight. She's found moments too late by her twin sister, who years later sets fire to herself to be free of the guilt. Farther in time, a child begins to complain of a bitter and burnt smell that fills his room every day when the sun comes up. He makes it to 18 and joins the army, where his troop would soon recount in horror how they saw him walk into the flashes of gunfire in the night, arms wide open. Years later in Oregon, a veteran confesses to his wife that he's still haunted by someone from his army days, and she suggests he talks to the local chaplain. While waiting for his appointment, the former army man finds himself bathing in the light passing through a stained glass window. He enjoys the feeling so much that he throws his body through it and into the ground 1 story below. The chaplain would live the rest of his years, wishing he had been fast enough to do something. Instead, he began to push his family away, never letting anyone in his home and barely leaving it himself. The chaplain's hair grew long and his teeth decayed. One day, after a pleading phone call from his daughter, he notices the warm glow of the oven and sticks his head in to enjoy the... "Dave, what the..." Kyle says, standing at the back door. It takes me a minute, but I ask what time it is. "Are you drunk, dude? I never heard from you and saw your phone's location was still at this place." I ignore his question and ask again what time it is. "Like 6 a.m. Almost sunrise. I was worried about you, dude. I threw myself out of bed to get here." Almost sunrise. Not yet. It's not yet daylight. There might still be time. I pick myself up and reach for the car keys beside Kyle's feet. As I walk to my car, I hear Kyle ask if anything happened in the house, but I don't answer. I run. We're here in the studio. I continue to crawl through the video recordings for any evidence of what happened, but I'm not finding any. The angle of the two mounted cameras don't catch where he was standing. I watched the footage from beginning to end 2 more times. Upon starting it the 3rd time, I finally see something I missed before. It's from my hat cam footage, when we first walked up to the back of the house. I thought it was the reflection of the moon lighting up the door window, but it's more than that. It looks like the outline of a face looking through the glass. I stare at the paused clip on my laptop until my phone vibrates next to me. It's Kyle. Where are you, dude? I'm worried about you. I type out a text. I'm at the studio, but it's not the full truth. We are at the studio. In the full brightness of the day, the daylight witch watches me work. I'm a door-to-door salesman. Saleswoman, actually. But sometimes I'd like to forget that part, especially when I get another weird smile or a wink from a potential buyer. I've heard before that this job is a definition of asking for it, because if coming to your house and saying, "May I come in?" doesn't constitute imposing yourself, then what does? I came to them first, after all. I will not bore you with the details about what I sell because frankly, it doesn't matter. I will say that I'm working for a charity, mostly because it makes me feel better about myself, but also because people who will answer their door for a noble cause are slightly different from those who will do it for, let's say, cable. They're usually much lonelier. As my boss likes to remind me, I'm not there to listen to their stories. I still do sometimes because a successful sale requires building a relationship. I'm very good at it. It may not seem believable, since I'm spilling my tea onto the online void as we speak, but I genuinely love people, and they also seem to genuinely love me. This leaves me with frequent Employee of the Month awards and a ton of personal tangents that nobody else wanted to carry. I like the tangents a lot. They're usually quite endearing. Sometimes they're tearful though, and very rarely, they're scary. When I started this job, the only other girl on the team told me, "You will meet people who will want to scare you." It was the best advice and the smartest warning I've ever gotten from anyone. I try to keep that in mind whenever a certain stiffness fills the air, and they lower their voices, whenever I become painfully aware of double-locked doors and very thick walls. But I don't get scared easily, and the truth is, I don't meet people like that very often. Perhaps that's why the creepy encounters I've had hold a special place in my memory. At the risk of sounding dramatic, I have to admit that, despite what my coworker said, it's not always their intention to freak me out. Sometimes they're demented, sometimes they're scared themselves, sometimes I can't tell. Take Mr. Rogers, for instance. I met Mr. Rogers when I was checking out a new estate. We have just gotten a permit to work there. I believe I was the first one to do so. It wasn't actually new, just a couple of older apartment buildings and a lot of much, much older people. I tried to remain optimistic, but the outlook wasn't great. I love the elderly, I truly do, but they have little money and a lot of time. And as much as I enjoy their tangents, I also have to make quota. So after I had gone through 3 6-floor buildings without even getting close to a sale, I should have called my boss and told him it's a desert. He likes using metaphors like that. I wish I'd done that, but I'm not a quitter. So I took a deep breath and rang another doorbell. It took him forever to open the door, and if not for the footsteps I heard inside, I would have left long before the hinges started to weep. He was very short, which gave him an almost comedic quality, especially next to the giant door. The doorknob was at the height of his neck. He was wearing a Saint Mary necklace, to which he unknowingly clung when he saw me, as if I were there to haunt him. I have to say I'm very tall. I smile a lot, though. His face immediately brightened when his eyes finally reached mine. "Oh, hello. Yes, please, come in," he said before I could even ask. I went inside. Can tell a lot about someone by their house. If you see enough houses, you notice most people are the same. Mr. Rogers' apartment had all the characteristics of an old person's apartment. Dark wood furniture, thick carpet, ugly curtains, framed photos standing on the cupboards. Except for the smell. It certainly wasn't dusty and old, but it also wasn't particularly good. Just very artificial. I had trouble saying if the producer went for sandalwood or strawberry. I figured Mr. Rogers had to have serious gastro problems, and probably thought a very strong air freshener did the trick. We chatted for a bit. He offered me tea, which I accepted. Normally, I politely declined, but his apartment was so small that I could see everything he was doing in the kitchen from the couch. I imagined the bathroom had to be very tiny. There was one more room, but it was closed. I could see the light pouring from under the door. We sat down with the tea, and as I was listing the reasons to donate to our charity specifically, ideally by using the monthly plan, he fixed his gaze on my face and said, "You look like my wife." I glanced at one of the photos on the cupboard, a black and white wedding one. I had to admit, I was a bit similar to her. I turned back to him and almost jumped. He leaned so much closer to me in those 2 seconds that I could now watch his wrinkles from up close. I was scared if I looked into his eyes, I'd see a predator. But I only saw an inspector, as if he was checking if my nose was exactly as straight as hers. It was worse, somehow. Then he just leaned back and smiled. I suddenly noticed how white his eyebrows were, and how most of his wrinkles writhed around the corners of his eyes. I recently noticed the first laughter lines on my face, too. I smiled back at him. "I'll show you the photos," he said. "She was very pretty." With that, he got up and went straight to the bookshelf. I suppressed a sigh. I know it sounds like a TV trope, but I can't overstate how often the elderly show me their photo albums. As long as I still close the sale, I'm fine with it. But I wasn't sure about this one. And even though he seemed rather sweet, I wasn't looking forward to being compared to his wife anymore. "Here," he said, handing me the album. "You can browse, and I'll look for my wallet in the meantime." I looked up. "Oh, sir, I'm sorry, but we don't take cash," I said. It's always the first thing I mention, but people, especially old people, forget. "I know, you need the bank account number," he answered, fumbling through his stuff. "I have it in my wallet. I'm not good at technology like you kids these days." I tried not to show my surprise. I focused on the photo album instead. There weren't really any recent ones, and you know how time likes to pester old photos. But even in those blurry pictures, I very easily recognized myself. I was holding the album so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Her nose really was as straight as mine. "Can't find it, I'm afraid," he sighed. "Must be in the bedroom." He just stood there, looking at me hopelessly. In my line of work, you have to learn very quickly how to recognize excuses. Confrontation is scarier than death, and people will do everything to avoid it. So if after a 20-minute chat they suddenly don't have any more time for all the formalities, they're lying. I have encountered the most elaborate and idiotic excuses, but no experience could have prepared me for leaving the wallet in another room. It surprised me so much, I didn't know what to say. But before I was able to come up with an answer, he said, "She must have locked it again." He came up to the bedroom door. He tried the handle a couple of times, but to no avail. "I'm sorry, who?" "She always does this," Mr. Rogers complained. Ignoring my question, he reached into his pants pockets and pulled out a dry handkerchief and a couple of pennies. "Dang it," he shouted so loudly I jumped in my seat. "She locked the key in, too. Always happens. Always." He started pacing around the room, running his hands through what was left of his hair. I didn't expect him to be so fast, with all that energy hidden inside his tiny body, as if waiting for enough anger to erupt. I could have sworn he was slouching when I came in, but the passion straightened him up. He suddenly seemed 20 years younger. He grabbed his glasses and phone from the kitchen counter. "I have to call her," he said, awkwardly punching the password on his phone. "She has to fix this." I started to get up. I wasn't really sure what was going on, but I doubted whoever Mr. Rogers was calling would solve the problem, since it seemed to be more or less in his head. "You know, sir, we don't have to do this now. I can come here on another day. Let you handle this now." "No." He looked up from his phone, staring at me from behind the thick glasses. "Stay. She has to open up. She can't do this forever." I was still trying to reach the front door while I heard the phone signal. He had a typical old person's sound settings, which would probably let me hear a whole conversation, if that were to happen. Whoever he was calling wasn't picking up. He tried the number 3 more times with his eyes locked on me all the time. The glasses made them look exceedingly bulbous. It would actually be quite funny if my heart wasn't racing. After the 3rd unsuccessful dial, I asked calmly, "Mr. Rogers, maybe you could call someone else." Somehow my question gave him a pause. He sat down on the couch and scratched his head. "My son has a spare key," he said. "Let's try him." I breathed a sigh of relief. I considered leaving for a moment, but eventually I sat down in a chair in front of him. His son did pick up, and without even the slightest bit of confusion about the locked door, said he'd be right there. "He'll be here in 10 minutes, the old man clarified. "Listen, honey, I'm very sorry. I didn't know it would take this long. He'll come with a key and we can fill in this form of yours, all right? I really want to help." He took me by surprise. For a second I forgot what I was even doing in his house, that I came in there with a purpose other than handling his crisis. I still didn't know what exactly was going on with the door, but Mr. Rogers certainly wasn't well. And even though I'm a good seller, I have my morals, and making deals with mentally unsound people doesn't exactly align with them. "I'm a little bit confused about the door." I tried to change the topic. "Someone else locked it. That's what you're saying." "Who?" "She does it sometimes." He sighed, leaning back on the couch. He was back to his slouching and painfully slow self. All that anger from a moment before evaporated. "She locks the door from the inside. Sometimes she puts my stuff in that room too, so I can't reach it, you know. But I can't really remember where I left the wallet. Getting old does that to you, you know." I swallowed and glanced at the door, and the thin strain of light under it. "You mean someone locked the door from the inside? That means she's still there, right?" He shrugged. I looked at the door again. "Well, not really. You know how it is. Sometimes I forget." He was interrupted by a knock so loud the door even shook a little. The one that came after it was even stronger. The 3rd one came when I was already on my way to the front door. Screw it, I thought. I'm not dealing with that. And as I opened the front door, I got startled again. This time by a tall man standing in front of me. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" he asked. "Thank you for getting the door, Angel." I heard the old man's voice. "Come in, son. We've been waiting for you." I took a deep breath. I hadn't realized how stuffy the apartment was. The air fresheners were messing with my head. I'm sorry. Were you knocking?" "Yes, he doesn't like it when I open the door myself. He sometimes gets startled." He was looking at me, frowning. "I'm sorry, but what are you doing here? Are you a nurse? Because someone has to help him. Us neighbors have been doing our best." "Oh, come on now, Kevin. You're not just a neighbor. You're like a son to me," Mr. Rogers shouted from behind. "Honey, lock the door, please." Everything inside me begged me to leave. I closed the door and turned to look at the young man. I'm sorry, are you not his son? He told me he was calling his son. He got really angry with the door. Does he live alone? Because he's been saying... The door, he sighed, taking his coat off. He looked around my age, which was definitely a bit young for being his son. I don't know how he does it, but this is the third time this week I'm here because of the door. Don't get me wrong, I'm always happy to help. I was on my way home anyway, but I keep telling him he should get it on the keychain with the rest of his keys, so it doesn't get lost all the time, and it's like talking to a brick wall. It's good someone's finally here to look after him. He glanced at me. You're a social worker, right? Not a nurse? I'm actually... Enough chit-chat, kids. Kevin, please give me the spare key, commanded Mr. Rogers. I'm not going to do that, sir, because you're going to lose it again, the man said, taking a key out of his bag. But I'll open the door for you. Here you go. I held my breath as he turned the key and pushed the door open. The room looked painfully ordinary. There was a closet, a bed, a bunch of meds laying on the bedside table, next to the wallet. It was just like any other bedroom of an old person. The only weird thing was the air freshener smell that was evidently coming from there. So strong that I gagged when the first wave hit me. Most importantly of all, the room was empty. Thank you, son, the old man said, smiling at his visibly tired neighbor. Now, dear, here's my wallet, he said, coming inside and picking it up from the table. We can finish the formalities now. And look, my key. She did it again. He turned in my direction, showing me a key triumphantly. After all these years, she's still trying to beat me. Kevin gave an exhausted look. All right, sir. I gotta go, he said, heading to the exit. Wait, I called after him. He turned around. Can we talk? I'm not a social worker. I'm a charity worker. Well, okay, that sounds misleading. I mean, I'm from... He stopped in his tracks with a puzzled look on his face, but suddenly something must have clicked, because he interrupted me saying, Oh, I knew I'd seen you before. You look like the woman in the photos. He pointed at the one on the cupboard. Very strange. Are you her granddaughter or something? What do you mean, am I her granddaughter? I asked. I was reaching my limit. No, I am not his wife's granddaughter, for God's sake. Do you really think I wouldn't have mentioned that before? Kevin frowned and looked over my head. Mr. Rogers was still in the bedroom, going through his wallet. That's not his wife. He lowered his voice. I shook my head. I'm sorry, what? Kevin sighed. It's not him either. He continued, pointing at the photo. Look how tall the groom is. People shrink, but not like that. I looked at the photo. The woman was over a head shorter than the man. I felt very stupid all of a sudden. Who are they then? His family? Old friends? He shrugged. I don't know. Don't ask about the man. He gets mad when I do. He only ever talks about her. All right, Mr. Rogers. I really have to go, he said louder this time. Maybe he doesn't have any nice photos of himself to put up, he added, turning to me again. It's only one photo on the cupboard. It's not like he has an album full of those. Wait, what? He left before I could utter an answer. When Mr. Rogers finally found his bank account number, I was already on my way out, apologizing for the trouble and promising I'd come back later. But I really had to go. I was worried he was going to follow me, but when I heard the key turning in the lock behind me, I breathed out, clutching the thing in my pocket. I left the building as fast as I could, and called my boss to take the rest of the day off. Back home, I took the folded photo out of my pants and carefully straightened it out. I was lucky it didn't fall apart after being tightly stuck in my pocket for so long. Even on a pawed, cracked surface, the woman was still distinguishable. I feel like I need to stress here that I don't normally steal from old people's photo albums, but I also don't normally see photos of people looking exactly like me. If I hadn't snatched it when he was going through his things, the story would have ended on that, and I would have probably discarded him as another senile old man who managed to scare me just because he caught me off guard, if only she didn't look exactly like me. The internet wasn't very helpful at first, but I kept digging, and after I put it through a couple of different reverse search engines, I finally found something. It was a scanned article from 50 years ago about an unsolved case. I used to think things like that didn't just get forgotten, but most of them do. A few hours later, I decided to go and see Mr. Rogers again. It was very stupid of me because there was very small chance I'd meet Kevin again, but it was the middle of the night. He was probably asleep, and I really couldn't help myself. I jumped in the car, bursting with excitement. When I got there, I had to sit for a moment in the parking lot to calm down. I had to be very careful and quiet, and those aren't my strong suits. I can seem a little impulsive, I know, but you have to understand that I never do this on my first visit. After I get invited inside, which is a must-do of course, I always like to snoop a little before committing to it. Look at their belongings, see if they live alone, if they have anyone that will actually mourn them when I'm done. Usually they do, so I leave them alone, but Mr. Rogers was practically asking for it. He was sleeping when I got inside. He looked very peaceful and innocent, the same as before, and I almost got fooled by it again. But I'm not of a faint heart, and I had learned to trust my instincts, so I didn't hesitate for long. I stayed in the apartment for a while after. There was still something that was bothering me, and I wanted to at least try and find it. I did, after a while. I found where the smell was coming from. There was a small box tucked under the bed, filled with dozens of various air fresheners. Inside it, tucked in like a treasured emblem, was her finger, all wrinkled and dried up. I couldn't smell it at all. The air freshener's odor was so strong it made my head spin. I lay down and closed my eyes, and for a while I just rested there, trying to get rid of the nausea. I imagined what she must have felt, with her only part left whole being this one bony finger. No wonder she closed the door so often. I would protect my parts like that too.